Welcome to our new episode of Foreign Correspondents Deeper into Hitchcock podcast. My name is Michał Oleszczyk and I'm joined as always by my fellow foreign correspondent
Sebastian Smoliński. Good morning or good evening.
Yes, it's good to see you again, and let's proceed to a film. We are going through the whole Hitchcock filmography, and we are trying to give you insights on every single feature film in Alfred Hitchcock's oeuvre. And last time we weren't too excited to discuss Easy Virtue, but I think we may be slightly more excited about the next film, which is the 1927 film called The Ring. It's a film that Hitchcock made after leaving Gainsborough Pictures, after joining British International Pictures. He was paid a handsome salary, and he made a film that feels closer to his interests, but also, I would say, to the formal traits of films that we admired so far, especially of The Lodger. Would you agree? Did you find Hitchcock in a better form that he was in Downhill and Easy Virtue?
Certainly, it's hard to believe sometimes that these two movies were not only shot by the same filmmaker, but also almost, let's say, month after month, because he was working very, very hard. And one of the biographers mentions that in 1927, he actually almost didn't leave the set because he was shooting one movie after the other. So yes, I think The Ring is much more interesting, but still I prefer The Lodger, which is like probably my favorite silent Hitchcock.
Mm-hmm. Well, the first thing that we should mention is actually it's a question. I'm curious. How long was the print that you watched? I saw it off a DVD that I got years ago, and it was only 85 minutes long. On IMDb, the running time is listed as 1 hour 56 minutes. So I was wondering, did you see the 2-hour version or the 1 hour and 25 minutes version?
Oh, I saw the 90-minute version, which is distributed by Kino Lorber, and it's, for example, available on Canopy if you use Canopy. But sometimes the running time of the movie depends on the number of frames per second. So maybe these two versions are similar.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is a film that is called by critic Jonathan Rosenbaum as the most Germanic film in Hitchcock's filmography. And I can understand that if you know the German films of the time, and I'm not even talking about expressionistic stuff, or I'm really concerned more with German kind of expressionistic melodrama of the time, of the kind that, I don't know, a film like Varieté or the Murnau films which usually show those violent sexual conflicts between a couple or within a triangle, usually with some class transgression thrown in. Then definitely, I mean, you could replace the subtitles and make it into a German film, because you do have this sense. There's a melodrama, there's a triangle, there's a woman who is working in a ticket office of this sort of variety show, and she is being courted by two men, Bob and what was the second name of the guy?
Jack.
Bob and Jack, and her name is Mabel. So it's like, it makes me think of the Paul Mazursky film, Bob and Jean and Mabel, Bob and Jack and Mabel. It's this triangle, and basically Jack is this very, very virtuous, hard working boxer, because this is set in a boxing world, and Bob is this strong guy who also is good at boxing, but he lures away Mabel from Jack, and as Jack is struggling to become a number one boxing star, Mabel is being constantly lured away by Bob, and Jack, once he reaches the heights of his career, he tries to win Mabel back. Would you agree that The Ring is stylistically much more interesting than Easy Virtue?
Oh, definitely I would agree. And to the quote you mentioned, to the opinion of Jonathan Rosenbaum, we can add Thomas Leach's quote, which says that The Ring is the most expressionistic of all Hitchcock's films. So it made me think twice, because first I understood it as maybe the most expressionistic of all silent Hitchcock movies, but then he says that of all of them, maybe we'll come back to the expressionistic themes later. Maybe next year we'll discuss his sound films. But I didn't have the feeling that there is any real terror or anxiety in this movie. So stylistically, it's brilliant. It's the camera work and the storytelling are very fluent and very engaging in many respects. So it's a very well-made movie. Also, I would mention that it's the film. I'm not sure if it's the sole film that Hitchcock took writing credits, just himself. Maybe there is another one, but it was his story, and he could finally shoot the way he liked. So it's a huge difference between Easy Virtue, which was, of course, stage play adaptation, and this movie, which was created from the scratch, let's say. So, for example, Romer and Chabrol claim that this is the turning point in Hitchcock's career, that now he's an accomplished auteur, but still several sentences later they mention that he still didn't create a true work, and he's still searching. And I think, yes, that's part of the problem that we as viewers or critics may have with this movie, that we can talk about the clever technique, but still there is some soul missing, or if soul is too pretentious a word, there is some, essence missing. There is no real tension. The same as with Easy Virtue. So that was my problem. I couldn't really find this story engaging. That was my problem.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it does have something to do with the construction and the notion of the female character, which is shown as highly manipulative here and solely interested in, pursuing the illicit affair that she is having, which also brings us this quite shallow characterization of Jack as this sort of victim of her. He is being presented as this very pure, very hard working and determined boxer, and it seems as if his diligence was basically making him into a perfect partner for this woman, whereas maybe he wasn't the perfect partner, and maybe that's why she, was gravitating towards the other. But here he is presented as this sort of pitiful victim that we are supposed to have sympathy for him because he's fighting so hard, and yet she is still cheating on him. I wonder, and we of course have no way of knowing this, but what kind of private feelings went into writing the script? Because as Jack, is going up the ladder, literally on the posters for fights, he goes higher and higher and higher. He becomes the top bill of the posters. That's basically what Hitchcock was undergoing at the time, right? With each film, he was aiming higher, and his career was developing. And this idea that it's through career and through position that you acquire, that you basically enhance your sexual attractiveness, is something that I think reverberates throughout Hitchcock's biography, certainly as it was written by Spoto, and probably it will reach its absolutely mortifying heights with the Tippi Hedren relationship, but that will be much later, but this will be basically it, right? I'm the best director in the world, you should love me for that, right? So here it's all in very, very, very early stages, but there's this very strange notion that, the better boxer he becomes, the more reason supposedly this woman should have to be with him, and yet she doesn't, right? So and she's presented in quite negative way. Did you find her portrayal negative?
I found her portrayal negative in this sense that she's not described as a person who actually makes decisions, that a person who chooses between the two or can judge which man she wants to be with. So this part of the story is really flat. And you mentioned Dupont's Varieté. I would like to mention, which is a movie which really comes to my mind and which I like a lot, and I'm sure many of our listeners like it as well, which is The Unknown by Todd Browning. From the same year, once again, I'm looking maybe to obviously for this kind of worldwide or global comparisons between the movies. But what strikes me as a similarity is this surrounding, because the movie begins in the amusement park, the circus. So it's once again Hitchcock showing us the mass culture, the way people spend their free time, and Hitchcock, of course, is part of that culture as a director. Todd Browning's The Unknown also is set in among circus performers, but in Browning we have it's a horror movie. It's really shocking. It's uncensored in many ways, but once again, when we look at the British movie, the British story, of course it's a different story, but in Browning we also have a lot of sexual desire which is unfulfilled, and there's also the issue of being a cripple, or of the body which is not perfect. And it's so Hitchcock's movie is also in a way about perfect male bodies, or not that perfect. My only point is that I find this more lowbrow take of Browning more fascinating than Hitchcock's. Supposedly, showing us the mundane, simple characters, but still this layer of melodrama which must render all these relations pretty clean and innocent dominates in the end, I would say.
Mm-hmm. I absolutely agree, and I think it's very, very indicative of the time and also of the sort of projected or designed audience of these films, which was, I think, mostly like bourgeois, let's say, that yes, both in British films and American films and German films of that period, the world of entertainment, especially circus, theater, carnival, vaudeville, shown from sort of behind the scenes, is a very attractive setting, because basically films like Varieté or this one show us an entertainment setting and people who are constantly on the move, people who are sort of nomads, and also whose sexual allegiances are much looser than, let's say, the real bourgeois people with apartments and businesses, like the world that Hitchcock actually stemmed from small shop owners. It's quite fascinating to show that world, and especially in German films of the time. And Siegfried Kracauer was also writing about this, that by showing this sort of figure of a bourgeois who is being seduced by the low life of the entertainment, like in The Blue Angel or in Varieté, these films actually negotiate the meaning of sexuality and of social order. And in this film, it's very clear that, first of all, Hitchcock is, for some reason, as we see pictures from his life at that time, he was, of course, getting more and more, let's say, round, and he was getting quite obese at that time. And for some reason, he channels his notions of masculinity into sports. This is the only sports film that he made, I think. I don't know of any other character in his films that is a sportsman or a sportswoman, or do you?
We may consider the heroes of Strangers on the Train as, playing tennis a lot.
Right, that's true.
Not professionally, as far as I remember, but...
Right, that's very true. Tennis also featured in Easy Virtue, but just as a backdrop. But here, yeah, this is a story of, of very fit men fighting and, fine-tuning their bodies, which is interesting, given that at that time, as Spoto also writes, Hitchcock was developing more and more body consciousness about his obesity and the shame of obesity, and he was, shy around beautiful women because he always saw his obesity as an impairment. So it's interesting in this way, but also I think that it's incredible how Hitchcock just adopts those, or actually not adapts this German way, expressionistic way of distorting the image in many interesting ways. Like we see image through glass, through moving water. And also he always ties it into point of view. It's never just for the sake of it. It's usually tied to somebody's point of view, and there are many striking images in this film. Really, I mean, the ratio of good images here is very high, very high.
Yes, I agree totally, and probably this is partially thanks to his collaboration with Jack Cox, who's his cinematographer in this movie for the first time, and they will shoot many more pictures in Great Britain. And also I would add the scene in which we see the reality filtered through the eyes of a drunk man at the wedding party.
Yes.
Because in this shot, Hitchcock really blurs the image. It's even something more than distortion. It's a total blurring of the contours and figures. So this is really very interesting. And yes, and also the way he shoots boxing matches, because I would say he's not really that interested into showing box as something really exciting. The story is about something else, but I think he tries almost all the possible ways to shoot these scenes. Beginning with, for example, the first fight, we see it from the very back. We see the shoulders of the many members of the audience. We do not really see the action, but in the climax, we see both the arena and the players, and there's also POV shots. So Hitchcock is really trying all of it. Still, probably the best years of classical box movies will come in the 40s with Body and Soul and Champion, but I think that it was also an important theme at the time. We can mention, for example, silent comedians acting as boxers, including Chaplin and The Battling Butler by Buster Keaton, which is, I think it's a very good one. I like it a lot.
Absolutely. And I would say that these boxing scenes are amongst the best in the film, in the ring. I really was very impressed by how they were edited and shot, and by the amount of detail that Hitchcock sort of finds in this situation. He even includes shots of cameras that are being put up above the ring, and so he's quite self-conscious. He shows the ring as a stage, but also he shows the cameras that will be filming the stage, and that's quite interesting. Also, there's this moment, and again, Hitchcock is thinking through physical detail. So the ring, of course, the title, and this is pointed out every time when someone is writing about the film, it's also, of course, the ring, the boxing ring. It's also the wedding ring, but it's also this strange bracelet, like this snake-like, it's actually flexible. You can adjust it. That Mabel gets from Bob, and it's very, I would say, erotic, because she wears this ring, this sort of, again, the snake-like shape. She wears it just above the elbow, and then she wears it on the finger. But when she has it just above the elbow, it really gives her a quite sexy look. She looks like this warrioress, like from, I don't know, It makes me think of this like ancient world, of women wearing this jewelry that was not, just on the wrist, but I don't know, like some ancient token of power. And I think it's quite modern, actually, because at the time women were experimenting with bold expressions of their beauty. And I like that she's sort of wearing this quite proudly, but then she's trying to hide it when she's with Jack. So this whole ring becomes the symbol of this relationship and this sort of sexual conundrum.
Yes, and Bob gives it to her as to mark her, as to kind of show his ability to be possessive. In a way, and it reminds me of a scene that we discussed already in The Lodger, the handcuffs scene, when the policeman is putting the handcuffs on the heroine's hands, and he's playing with her, but we can read between the lines that it's kind of a, maybe in a way, a sexual gesture, but also a gesture of possession, that she belongs to him. And in this case, I find something similar, because this bracelet is really taking part of her body to itself.
Yes, it's also probably fetishism on some level. This film, I feel, makes a total visual mockery of the idea of marriage, because this wedding scene is horrible. I mean, it's just, all this obscene behavior, the guy getting drunk, the best man, I guess, like gobbling the beer, and it's I mean, there is no gravity, there is no seriousness in Hitchcock's portrayal of marriage, which is funny since he was getting married at the same time.
Yeah, and I also find that there is some. I'm not sure if we should call it class tensions between the two heroes, because they are both boxers. Ian Hunter plays the more successful one, the Bob Corby character we mentioned, and he's the sources say he's the Australian boxer. And he's in the first scene, nobody believes that he can box because he has a nice suit, he's smart guy, elegant, and the Jack character is like we mentioned, he's the people's boxer, we could say. He's a simple guy, not really sophisticated, and his wedding mirrors that, I would say. And there are some jokes, as you mentioned, the drunk best man, and I think part of the pleasure of this movie is also that Hitchcock found many interesting faces, and which function as this kind of we see these actors in episodes. I'm thinking, of course, about the best man guy, who's like has this very very peculiar face. And one more, I think that probably the coach also has a pretty interesting face. So Hitchcock is trying to, let's say, paint the background with a harsher brush, we could say, or like to fill it with some interesting elements. In this case, the interesting faces, interesting actors. So there is some life to this movie that was missing from Easy Virtue and large parts of Downhill, I would say.
Yes, I completely agree. And also it's because Hitchcock is using one of his strengths in the film, which is he explores the tension between the, let's say, stage life of characters and the behind the scenes life. He will come back to this many times in the future. In Stage Fright, of course, where we have actresses and their on stage life and off stage. Rare Window, Grace Kelly character is a model. Man Who Knew Too Much, the second version, Doris Day is a singer. So here again, I love this, that we see sort of Jack fighting this huge important fight in Royal Albert Hall, which is a location that also will come back in Man Who Knew Too Much. But by the way, it's clearly fake. The paintings of the audience, it's jarring, I would say. Now you can tell it's not the interior of Royal Albert Hall. It's a painting. But so you have this huge fight, and this sort of living in the spotlight, and then you have this, to create the tension, you have this very small scene of the guys, of just his friends bringing a bottle of champagne to celebrate, and they wait and wait and wait for the wife to show up, but she doesn't. We see the elevator coming, so maybe and it's just a small scene, but it's very true, and it's funny. I would say it's funny. It shows this sort of friendliness between men, and of course, I think the film, unfortunately, is quite misogynistic. I would say that the female character is so stereotypical, and our sympathies are so much with Jack that I would say that overall it's not a film in which Hitchcock would portray his female character deeply.
Yeah, so if we consider The Ring as a love triangle, then we must say that the parts of this triangle are not equal, and they are not of equal interest to Hitchcock. Yes, certainly. And the scene you mentioned with the champagne, it also ignites the one of the sequences in which Hitchcock is once again visualizing the thoughts and fears of characters. And once again, we didn't have a lot of that in Easy Virtue, but here we have, and it's one of the pleasures to watch this movie and to see how Hitchcock once again translates, as in The Lodger, in several sequences, he translates the thoughts to images, which seems to be like his his passion in this movie and other projects. That it's really something that he wants to do. So I just wonder if Hitchcock knew that he needs to work closer on female characters in his next movies. That because now when we think about Hitchcock, not about his early movies, but about his most famous ones, then he's a woman's director. We could say that, like George Cukor, like several others. He's a woman's director, but it wasn't like that at the beginning. He was more focused on male characters and more interested in their troubles. So I wonder if Hitchcock understood that to be a, let's say, first-class, first-rate director, he needs to be more attentive to this issue. What do you think?
That's interesting, especially since the pivotal film in his filmography will be Blackmail, which will very much focus on female experience and also of the experience of being violated. I think this will really open a whole new chapter in his oeuvre, when he will explore those extreme feelings of violation, of revenge, of violence, of he will really. I mean, I think for me, Blackmail, which is coming up, not yet, but we'll come to it. But also plays with female subjectivity in very novel ways, especially through sound, in the sound version. I think that here Hitchcock is still far from that. I mean, he's only 2 years away from that, but stylistically he's far away from this kind of attentiveness to female subjectivity, which will clearly be the pivotal aspect of Blackmail and later on of Sabotage and other films. But yes, and I was surprised by revisiting The Ring. I saw it many years ago on an old VHS, actually, from the UK, which someone presented to me. And this is something shocking. I remembered it as completely different movie. I really had some images, some scenes in my mind. It turned out that no, I thought the story was different. This is really a reason, I think, to revisit films, because I saw this around 14 years ago. And nowadays, I look at it completely differently. So I think, every 10 years or so, you should rewatch some films, because you change so much. And it's good to renew those impressions.
So what was your, how did you remember The Ring? What can you say about your, this first impression from 14 years ago?
I always thought that The Ring had some kind of a criminal aspect to it. I did remember that. I still have that VHS, actually. So I remembered it as having some kind of a murder story. But I think it actually probably seeped from Murder, the film 1930 film that I saw at the same time. So maybe that's how I remembered it. But really, I one of the joys of doing this podcast with you is that I revisit those films. And I think, oh my God, I totally didn't remember. So yes, I'm glad at least that for the record, our impressions are now out there, and hopefully we will make some people discover those films or rediscover them.
Yes, and you mentioned that you were stunned by many images, and the issue I want to raise or to ask you or ask myself, it may be a very simple question, but in many books about Hitchcock, you find this, we could say, fascination of critics and of filmmakers who admire Hitchcock, of his technical tricks, especially in these early movies, which are not as thoroughly and analyzed, and maybe they do not allow for such a thorough, fascinating and ripe analysis. We can write the whole book about Psycho, and some people have done it, as Philip Scarry, whom we hope to maybe one day invite as a special guest. But probably you cannot do the same with The Ring, even if you tried a lot. So what I'm thinking about looking at Hitchcock's early movies is that because he was very young at the time, right? Let's remember we're talking about a 20-year-old,
28,
yes, who's still changing as a person and as a connoisseur of art, as well as someone who responds to images and books and stories, etc. So I just wonder if he's really interested in the stories he's telling at this stage.
I think yes. I mean, I have no way of supporting this, but I think that by default, Hitchcock was interested in stories. I mean, he read a lot, and this is also something that Charles Barr analysis and books. I mean, he kept going to theater, he kept reading stuff, he kept reading books, novels, he was devouring stories. And so by default, yes, I would say. And also, I think that if you squint your eyes, you can see that there are themes there that are constantly on the sort of in his focus. And I think in this film, probably more than in any other so far. I mean, with this sort of his sole writing credit and this sort of theme of reaching excellence, experiencing rejection, some hostility towards women, which will, of course, surface later on, especially in his extremely degrading behavior towards especially Tippi Hedren. I think, yes, there are those themes and he's working through those issues. But of course, he was the 28-year-old guy from shop owner, private shop owner background in England. So, and he was acquiring some intimate knowledge very late in his life, partly by attending some parties in Berlin. So yes, we cannot imagine even that he would be able to speak of those themes as eloquently as we are doing right now, or his scholars are. He's a product of a different age. He's a product of late 19th century theater and novels, but he's transforming them into 20th century art form through image and then through sound. Are you so far? Let's say this is our way of traveling through Hitchcock's filmography. So I would say, what's your favorite Hitchcock film after these initial episodes of our podcast? This is the 5th one. Is it still The Lodger?
I think it's still the Lodger, and I like The Pleasure Garden a lot because it was the first. And so I have this emotional attitude towards it because it was the very beginning, both of my adventure with this early Hitchcock and of our adventure as makers of this podcast. And maybe my question about Hitchcock, which sounded probably like a blasphemy, right? Can you ask if Hitchcock was interested in storytelling? It's a funny question, but maybe it's my way of trying to kind of comprehend my responses to The Ring, which were not really that emotional. And I compared it to the other movie that I saw yesterday for the first time, Underworld by Joseph von Sternberg. So the let's say the first, as many scholars say, the first really important gangster movie that established the formula for early talking gangster movies. And I was stunned by it. I was stunned by the way he creates this. Also, it's also a story of love triangle, and there are some similarities between the movies. And I could respond much more emotionally to Sternberg, who was also a very brilliant stylist, right? And his cinematography is of course brilliant. Than to Hitchcock's The Ring. And so maybe the question I will try to answer for myself in the future episodes is, if I will when do I start to respond to Hitchcock really more emotional, in a more emotional way?
Well, I think this is really a question of what do you respond to more, to realism or to flamboyance? Because at that point, I think Sternberg is a little bit more flamboyant in his style. Mm-hmm. This is a quite realistic film, The Ring, but yeah, I mean it's a valid question, and one of the constant complaints that people had about Hitchcock was that he was a mechanical storyteller, that he wasn't interested in emotion, that he was simply piecing together his films from preconceived camera angles, and that he never gave any consideration to the feelings. It was just a pure mechanism, which Psycho sort of put this idea to the extreme, that it was just pure horror mechanism. But we are a long way from Psycho, and yet this film, The Ring, I think in some ways evokes even later Hitchcock films. So yes, by way of closure, I would say that this was an interesting experience of revisiting it. I wasn't bored. I definitely enjoyed it, and I think that we found some interesting points to talk about Hitchcock's The Ring. Thank you for listening to this episode of Foreign Correspondence Deeper into Hitchcock podcast, and please like our Facebook page If you like the episodes, then please share them on Twitter and on other social media. We will be returning in just 3 weeks with another film in Alfred Hitchcock's biography, and this time it will be The Farmer's Wife. Thank you so much for listening. We are foreign correspondents
Deeper into Hitchcock.